There's something I'm finding out as I'm aging, that I am in love with the world.
So, in 2023, the BBC put out its list of the 100 greatest children's books of all time. They polled 177 experts in children's literature, having each of them make a top 10 list of the greatest children's books according to them, and the top 100 were those that received the most votes in a rank choice system. Perhaps it wouldn't surprise you to learn that the number one spot went to Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak. The award-winning book has sold over 17 million copies in its lifetime, so it's more than likely that you've come across it before. In my own experience, my grandma read this book to me as a child, and I'm sure she wasn't the only one. It was all too likely that my parents and teachers read it to me as well. But before writing this video, years had passed without me reading the book. I hadn't truly experienced it since I was a child. I never even saw the movie, nor did I watch it for this video since I wanted everything to just be focused on the literature. Despite having no contact with the book for years on end, I still remembered it quite well, which also just goes to show the power of its longevity. But as with the work of men like Shel Silverstein and Roald Dahl, I wondered if Maurice Sendak's book might resonate differently with me as an adult than it did as a child, so I picked up my own copy of the book and I dug into it. But before we jump straight into the book itself and my impressions, let's talk a little bit more about Maurice Sendak. Death was a very unfortunate reality for Sendak from a young age. He was born in New York to Jewish immigrant parents from Poland. They managed to escape Europe before Hitler's rise to power, but many extended family members were killed in the years following. Moreover, Sendak suffered from diphtheria, scarlet fever, and pneumonia at a young age. There was a very real possibility that he would die young, and he had to confront that as a child. He credited this awareness of mortality with providing his drive toward artistry. Some of his favorite memories came from looking out the window with his grandmother. His father would tell him that if he was lucky and if he didn't blink, he might see an angel out the window. Each day that he didn't see it, his father told him it was because he blinked. If you've followed my videos for some time, perhaps this next tidbit won't surprise you, but Where the Wild Things Are was panned and challenged upon release. Many adults found the book too dark and scary for children and supposed it supported messages of rebellion. That, plus the frightening appearance of the wild things, led many officials to ban the book in schools and libraries. But despite the negative reception from a portion of the public, the book won the Caldecott Medal in 1964, which marked it as the most distinguished American picture book for children in 1963. One thing that shocked me upon rereading the book was how little text there actually is. In fact, since there isn't much text, and since the book is in the public domain, how about I just read the whole thing so that we're all on the same page throughout the video? Where the Wild Things Are by Maurice Sendak. The night Max wore his wolf suit and made mischief of one kind and another. His mother called him Wild Thing, and Max said, "I'll eat you up," so he was sent to bed without eating anything. That very night in Max's room, a forest grew, and grew, and grew until his ceiling hung with vines and the walls became the world all around. And an ocean tumbled by with a private boat for Max, and he sailed off through the night and day, and in and out of weeks and almost over a year, to where the wild things are. And when he came to the place where the wild things are, they roared their terrible roars, and gnashed their terrible teeth, and rolled their terrible eyes, and showed their terrible claws, till Max said, "Be still," and tamed them with the magic trick of staring into all their yellow eyes without blinking once. And they were frightened, and called him the most wild thing of all, and made him king of all the wild things. "And now," cried Max, "let the wild rumpus start." "Now stop," Max said, and sent the wild things off to bed without their supper. And Max, the king of all wild things, was lonely, and wanted to be where someone loved him best of all. Then all around from far away across the world, he smelled good things to eat, so he gave up being king of where the wild things are. But the wild things cried, "Oh, please don't go. We'll eat you up, we love you so." And Max said, "No." And the wild things roared their terrible roars, and gnashed their terrible teeth, and rolled their terrible eyes, and showed their terrible claws. But Max stepped into his private boat, and waved goodbye, and sailed back over a year, and in and out of weeks, and through a day, and into the night of his very own room, where he found his supper waiting for him. And it was still hot. Now, before I jump into any analysis, remember that what I have to say about the book shouldn't be taken as a definitive reading. There's a beautiful simplicity in Sendak's writing, not uncommon in most children's books. That simplicity allows for a wide breadth of interpretation, and that's beautiful. I don't want to take that away from anyone, so just remember that my interpretation is only an interpretation. When my grandma read the book to me as a child, I'm not sure if I ever clocked the notion that Max imagined the whole book in his head. Granted, we don't know that with certainty, but Sendak gives us some clues that the experience was imagined rather than truly lived. For one thing, we see a piece of art on the wall drawn by Max. It shows a creature that's vaguely similar to almost all of the wild things in one way or another. Then there's Max's wolf costume, which feels quite similar in almost all the same ways. There's also the tent he sets up, not unlike the tent we see later in the story. Moreover, after Max has sailed back to his room, he looks quite groggy. That could be from a long journey, certainly, but it could also be that he just woke up. As such, supper ended up in his room without him noticing. And more probable than the smell of supper hitting his nose from across the ocean would be his unconscious mind noticing it as he slept. Of course, I do have to point out that the moon took on a different phase from when Max first entered his room, so there's this interesting line between the real and the imagined. Take a look at this. This is just the text of the book, grouped according to the phrases that appear on the same pages. Kind of looks like a poem, no? Look at how many lines and phrases begin with the word "and." This is something I actually try to avoid in my poetry because I fear the word "and" gets too repetitive. I think a lot of modern authors feel similarly, as many contemporary poets opt to use the ampersand instead of "and." In my mind, that definitely makes the text feel less like prose while also taking away some of the monotony of reading "and" over and over. But here, Sendak's repeated use of the conjunction feels a lot like improvisation. It reads like a child making something up as they go along. And while Maurice Sendak isn't improvising, we assume that Max is. His journey to where the wild things are is pure imagination, one that he's probably just making up as he goes, even if sleeping. I think anyone who's read Where the Wild Things Are would recognize imagination and self-expression as some of the work's big ideas. If we take Max's journey as purely in his imagination, it's worth noting how each wild thing is unique from one another. On the surface, none of the wild things seem all that distinct from each other, but almost all of them have unique features. There's one with a nose horn, one that looks like a goat, one with a scaly lower body, one with webbed feet, one with human feet, and on and on. If Max conjured all of this in his mind, his creativity should be applauded. While writing this video, a coworker saw me reading the book at my desk. He's a retired kindergarten teacher and told me that it was his favorite to read to his students. I asked him what the kids thought of the book, and he told me they absolutely loved it, despite generally thinking it was scary. To paraphrase him, it's the first story that many kids can understand as fiction. While it might scare them in some capacity, they know the story didn't happen in the real world, whether it truly happened to Max or not within the story's context. There's just something so significant in that, being a child's first milestone on their way to understanding fiction. As a character, Max probably clicks with child readers for a reason. From the book's opening, we see that Max is highly expressive and imaginative. Unfortunately for his mother, his creative outlets are rather destructive. He drives nails through the wall, chases his dog with a fork, and yells at his mother. Readers, both young and old, can probably understand why Max's mother sends him to his room. And while it might seem easy to categorize Max's behavior as monstrous, just as Penn State explains, there are so many reasons a child might misbehave. In Max's case, it could be an issue of youth, strong emotions, or wanting certain needs met. Speaking of Max's needs, it's rather cruel for his mother to send him to bed without supper. As the Button law firm explains, withholding food and water is an unnecessary and cruel form of prohibited punishment. Doing so can cause lasting psychological damage to young kids who might associate punishments with eating and drinking. Now, this article is specifically about daycares that withhold food, but most people would agree that parents withholding meals from children as a form of punishment is abusive, even if it was more widely accepted 60 years ago. Where the Wild Things Are certainly does tell a story about imagination, but to me, at least on this most recent reading, the more prominent story is that of a son and his mother. When Max first arrives to the place where the wild things are, he tames all of them with, quote, the magic trick of staring into all their yellow eyes without blinking once. This causes the creatures to call him the most wild thing of all. But where could Max have learned a trick like this? Probably from his mother, no? How many of us have had our parents stare us down until we backed away from a bad decision? And so, if such a skill makes Max the most wild thing of all, what does that make Max's mother? As much as Max's mother scolds him for his wrongdoing, she also indulges and encourages some of his wild behavior. After all, who made him his wolf suit? The strange magic trick isn't the only behavior Max picked up from his mother, and while we only assume that was a learned behavior, the next example is much more explicit. After the wild rumpus, Max sent the wild things off to bed without their supper. This is clearly a learned behavior. He does it because he's now an authority figure with one other major authority figure to emulate. He knows it's what an authority figure does when someone is acting rowdy. And even though he seemingly enacts this decree for no reason other than emulation, I'd argue the reason is stated right there. Max, the king of all the wild things, was lonely and wanted to be where someone loved him best of all. As with his behavior at the beginning of the book, Max's decision here feels less like unreasonable misbehavior and more like acting out due to his emotions. He's simply learning himself, as any child does, and acting accordingly, even if it seems irrational. The fact that he follows his mother's example shows that he looks up to her, at least in some sense. No matter how tumultuous their relationship might be at times, he still follows her example. And how significant is it that, even as Max believes he's miles away from home, he can still smell his mother's supper from across the ocean? Despite the power he wields and the fun he could have among the wild things, he gives it all up upon smelling a home-cooked meal. And indeed, upon returning home, he finds his supper waiting for him, and it was still hot. The dinner waiting in Max's room is significant for so many reasons. For one thing, it shows a level of regret from Max's mother. She must have realized she was too hard on her son and sought to rectify her actions. That doesn't justify withholding food in the first place, but it really humanizes Max's mother, doesn't it? Like, I don't have children, but I can imagine parents often regret the things they say or do when their child misbehaves, then course correct as best they can. In that sense, Max and his mother are sort of foils to each other. They both misbehaved. They both treated each other poorly. While Max did yell at her, she actually yelled at him first. She lost her temper. But they both realized something about themselves and about each other. In Max's case, he realizes that even though his mother is hard on him, she loves him best of all. His mother's case is parallel but almost in the opposite order. She realizes that she loves him best of all, and as such regrets being so hard on him. It's also significant that, in the context of Max's mind, he can smell his mother's cooking from across the sea. Sometimes we refer to certain things as universal languages. Two things that often fall under that category are food and love. We could take Max's dinner as a direct metaphor for his mother's love for him. In that sense, love is the thing that crosses all borders, all divides. It reaches out to us no matter how far away we are. And notice Max doesn't smell his dinner until he realizes how lonely he is, until he realizes that he's missing some much-needed love. And, this is an utter cliché, but to paraphrase Sandy Cheeks, a true home is wherever you're surrounded by people who care about you. As I write this script, I can't help but be reminded of the story of the prodigal son. The tale is one of Jesus' most famous parables shared in the Bible. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus tells the story of a young man who leaves his father's farm. The son asks to have his inheritance early, and he spends it all on a life of indulgence. After his fortune runs out, and after a lot of deliberation and harsh conditions, he decides to return home to beg his father for a job. In the King James Version of the Bible, Luke 15:20-25 reads, "And he arose and came to his father. But when he was yet a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and fell on his neck and kissed him. And the son said unto him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in thy sight, and am no more worthy to be called thy son. But the father said to his servants, Bring forth the best robe, and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring hither the fatted calf, and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead, and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to be merry." So despite the way the son tried to live his life, despite the way he took his inheritance and left home, his father welcomed him back with open arms and a feast. What really emphasizes the notes of love in the story is the context behind it. Before Jesus told this parable, Luke says that the Pharisees and scribes criticized the Savior for receiving and eating with sinners. In the parable of the prodigal son, Jesus is making a point about how a heavenly father would receive his children, despite all of them being sinners. Now, I'm not saying Sendak intended an allusion to the Bible, but it's hard to deny the similarities between the stories. It's like I said in my Bluey video ages ago, just because something seems like a religious allusion doesn't necessarily mean it's pro-religion. Ultimately, what both stories point out is that good parents are willing to give their kids second chances, especially when the kids are ready to take a second chance on themselves. And as a final note on Max's arc and his relationship with his mother, remember the straw that broke the camel's back. Max was ultimately sent to his room when he yelled at his mother, "I'll eat you up." When Max leaves the island, the wild things are trying to convince him to stay. They say, "Oh, please don't go, we'll eat you up, we love you so." Perhaps in that moment, Max realizes that "I'll eat you up" isn't exactly something you say to someone you truly love. But you know, as I reread this book as an adult, something occurred to me. Where's Max's father? He's never mentioned in the book, but that's not to say he doesn't exist. He could be working while Max's mother is a stay-at-home mom. But as I was reading this book for the first time since I was a kid, I couldn't help but see the story as an allegory for divorce. And remember, don't take this as a definitive reading, but hear me out. In fiction, there's a trope called visit by divorced dad. Basically, if any character mentions that their parents are divorced, their unseen parent will eventually turn up. You've probably seen it before, maybe in Animorphs or The Babysitter's Club, but the example I often think of is Modern Family. In the show, Manny Delgado initially idolizes his birth father, Javier, played by the forever underrated Benjamin Bratt. Javier seems like the coolest guy around, and he always treats Manny to a good time. However, Javier fails to show up when it matters most. To me, it felt as though the wild things were a metaphor for Max's dad. If Max is a child of divorce and his mom is his primary caregiver, perhaps his dad is the man who shows up when it's fun, but not when it's most important. Max has a good time with the wild things, but he recognizes that none of them love him best of all, not like his mother. Even if Max's parents aren't divorced, this could still be an insight into how Max views his father. But if his parents are divorced, that would give all the more reason for him to act out, and being a single parent would make his mother all the more stressed. Again, I don't even mean to say that this is what Sendak intended, it's just one potential reading. But for other readings, let's refer to some people who are smarter than I am. Kathy Lown, writing for Britannica, asserts that Where the Wild Things Are is a lesson for children about why their parents discipline them. The book, quote, explains the purpose of timeouts, assists children with anger management, and teaches them to channel their tempers creatively, end quote. I can absolutely agree with this. While depriving Max of his supper was cruel, sending him to his room and giving him a chance to cool down was probably the right thing to do. Not only did he cool down, but he arguably learned a lesson all on his own, just with a little push from his mother. To that point, a friend of mine supposed that it was always his mother's intention to bring dinner to him. They did still, however, acknowledge that it would be wrong to threaten a child in that way, even if it wasn't their true plan. Threatening to withhold food could potentially create the same issues that actually withholding the food might create, even if the child does get fed in the end. Whatever the thoughts in his mother's head, Max's mom ultimately had the right idea in creating some space for Max. Right idea, but without flawless execution. On Literary Hub, Liam Hennigan hones in on the idea of the wilderness. As he writes, it underscores an element of distance from both ordinary things and from the human community. Wilderness can be solitary. It posits the rambunctiousness of diverse wild things and provides a realization that one cannot dwell forever in the wild. In this notion of wilderness, there is a heightened reminder that after our fill of wilderness, one can, or perhaps even should, return, replenished, to the comforts of home. In this sense, we could almost read Sendak's book as a story of nature versus nurture. As appealing as it might be to be free from human constraints for a time, we all require loving nourishment from those around us. Still, each of us ought to confront the wild, whether material or inside of us, to obtain self-mastery. A lot of people, including Hennigan, seem to view the book from a metatextual lens. For Hennigan, he notes how often the book is read aloud to children, and how that harkens back to the art of oral storytelling. Since the book is so prominent in children's literature, many analysts opt to look at it through the lens of what makes a children's book successful. In an interview on NPR's Fresh Air, Terry Gross suggested that Sendak's books were about overcoming fear. He said that might be partly true, but that his main intention when writing anything was simply to amuse or entertain. Nevertheless, Sendak acknowledged that fear was an important part of his childhood, being afraid of even the Hoover vacuum cleaner his mother used. Sendak further described his father as a reasonable man, though he did blame his 1-year-old for the Wall Street crash. In fact, Sendak said he based the Wild Things off of his extended family, who would come for dinner each Sunday night. However, he didn't realize it until he had them all down on paper. And according to Gross, Sendak told her that adults looked like big and grotesque creatures to him as a child. He couldn't imagine ever becoming one. Sendak recognized that he became rather monstrous and scary to children later in his life, as most strangers are to youth. At a book signing, he once tried to take his book from a child to sign it, and the child cried and said, "Don't crap up my book." Sendak thought it was the bravest thing he'd ever heard and nearly wept. The father of the child felt embarrassed, and Sendak pulled him aside and urged him not to punish the boy. While Sendak was brought up kosher, he described himself as totally secular in his later years. He loved his memories of practicing Judaism, especially the candles and the reverence for the dead, but he said that he had no need for faith. He said his gods were Shakespeare, Keats, Mozart, Herman Melville, and Emily Dickinson, with her being at the very top.
These are wonderful gods who've gotten me through the narrow straits of life.
Sendak even employs a couple of Dickinson's trademark dashes at the end of his phrases in Where the Wild Things Are. Sendak saw his parents as vulnerable. He knew their lives were extremely hard, and he knew they weren't exactly capable of fending off his death. He didn't say that as a criticism, just as an observation. They spoke more Yiddish than English, with Sendak himself speaking Yiddish as a child. Only late into their lives did they learn English, and they spoke it poorly, according to their son. His father came to America chasing after his mother, who was sent to America by her family, specifically to get her away from the man who so desired her. And as Sendak noted, because of that impulse decision on his father's part, he survived. He felt extreme survivor guilt, as did his wife, but to a lesser extent since she was shipped off rather than choosing to go to America. While the husband and wife worked to get her family to America, by the time they had the means for the father's side, it was too late. As Sendak said, there was no getting Jews out of Europe at that point. With all of this perspective, it might surprise you to know that Sendak felt there was a lack of comprehension between him and his parents. His brother did a great deal of his parenting, shattering the illusion that he was meant to be a decent child. That said, he was still a very quiet kid. Unfortunately, his sister never could shatter her parents' expectations, knowing she simply had to be pretty and marry a decent man one day. Even though Sendak was an atheist, he truly believed he'd see his brother again after he died. In 2008, Sendak came out as gay and revealed he'd been living with his partner, psychoanalyst Eugene David Glynn, for 50 years. His parents never knew that he was gay. He regretted never coming out to them, stating the reason for keeping his secret was that he just wanted them to be happy. Moreover, coming out as a gay children's book author would have killed his career in its earlier years. Maurice Sendak passed away in 2012. I know we've strayed a lot from the book, but I hope these insights into Sendak's life perhaps give greater insight into the story. As far as meaning in his work goes, when asked about certain lines in his book Brundabar, he said, "I won't pretend that I know exactly what it means," knowing full well he was the author. And I assume he'd take a similar stance with Where the Wild Things Are. He wouldn't pretend to know exactly what it means, and we can't know for certain either, but we do know what it means to each of us individually. One day, when Sendak was looking out the window, he exerted all his effort to keep his eyes open, and he saw it. An angel moved slowly from left to right across his open window. The being never turned toward him, it just passed from left to right. After he saw it, he shrieked and hollered, and when his father came in and heard what happened, he said that Sendak was a very lucky kid. This book has touched me and so many others. I put in some work on this script while at my day job, and while the book was out on my desk, you wouldn't believe all the coworkers and customers who pointed it out and shared their positive feelings about it. I can absolutely credit Sendak's book with inspiring immense creativity within me. And while I never saw an angel for myself, I'd like to think that I was a very lucky kid too. As a kid, I definitely related to Max and his vivid imagination. As an adult, I relate to Max's mother too. I make mistakes, including in the way I treat others. I try to learn from them and make things right. In a way, sometimes we're all Max. Sometimes we're all Max's mother. And in either case, we all need each other. We all need someone who loves us best of all. And I love you best of all, dear viewers. And as always, I'd love to know your thoughts about this video, Where the Wild Things Are, Maurice Sendak, and any other thought you might have. I want to take a moment to give a special thanks to my patrons, This video wouldn't have happened without them, and I'm extremely grateful for their continued support. If you want to get early access to videos, join the community Discord, or just support what I do, you can join my Patreon as well. That'll also get you priority review over on the second channel. Go subscribe over there if you want for some writing tips and other opinions. In the community Discord, we just started doing writing prompts with each other, and that's been a lot of fun. If you want to support the channel in other important ways, liking, commenting, and subscribing goes a long way. You're also welcome to follow me on Instagram to see what I'm reading, and Twitter to see me post first drafts of poems. Thanks for watching, and ultimately keep in mind, this is a rough draft.